avenue heading?
Well, I think what people need to understand, first of all, is that the legislature sets maximum penalties for each and every crime.
Okay.
You know, we are a three-part system. The legislature makes the laws. The judiciary is supposed to uphold the laws.
Well,
So-
you hear that on the news. This person has 10 years over their head. And then if anybody knows a lot, the odds of getting a 10-year sentence are not really great.
No.
But it's there,
Right.
and it could happen, but the likelihood is not that great.
That's correct. Because in addition to passing laws with maximum penalties, the legislature also passes what are called guidelines for sentences that apply in all felony cases. And it's a very simple system. You compute the level of the crime, which is determined by the legislature, how severe they think that crime is in the scheme of crimes in total. Then you compute the criminal history score, and they give certain weights to your prior crimes. As your criminal history score goes up, the sentence goes up.
Right.
If you've done it before, you're probably going to get a more severe sentence. Those guidelines are passed by the legislature. They are the law.
Right.
If a judge wants to depart from those guidelines, first of all, if you want to go more severe, the prosecutor has to ask for what are called aggravating factors. Those aggravating factors have to be found by a jury beyond a reasonable doubt, just as guilty or not guilty of the crime itself. If a jury finds aggravating factors, then the judge has to take a look at those factors. And if they think, based on those factors, that this particular crime is substantially and compellingly different than the average crime of that sort, then and only then can they depart from those guidelines. So judges' hands are somewhat tied by the legislature, who makes the laws.
Otherwise, we'd have a king, the judge writing the laws and deciphering it out.
Exactly. So, you know, I've had questions. I don't think people who commit criminal vehicular homicide get a tough enough sentence. And I'm like, well,
I would agree with that.
you need to talk to your legislature then. You need to get them to increase those penalties if you feel that that's appropriate. But the judges are bound to apply the law.
Right.
And the legislature passes the laws. So the guidelines were passed in an attempt to reduce disparity in sentencing. So it's not based on your age. It's not based on your affluence.
Right.
It's not based on your race. It's not based on where you live. It's based simply on your criminal history and the level of the crime you commit. It was meant to promote equity in sentencing. So I applaud Minnesota for that effort. I don't think those types of factors, race, gender, things like that, should be used in determining a sentence. So I applaud their effort at reducing disparity in sentencing. But a judge has to follow what the law is, and the legislature dictates what the penalty is in most circumstances, and only if your crime is very different and that's found by a jury can you depart from that.
Well, do you see judges kind of pushing the limits on that aren't really taking this into account, the legislature, and kind of pushing the envelope? I mean, you've been in the public defender's office.
I have.
You're there now. And
I'm there now. I've been there off and on for 18 years.
Okay. So do you see judges kind of pushing the envelope on this?
Well, we make departure motions sometimes.
Okay.
And there's two different ways you can depart. You can give a more severe sentence in time. It's called a durational departure, or less time. Or you can do what's called a dispositional departure. Certain crimes, based on your criminal history, call for probation with the amount of time, as you put it, hanging over your head for a number of years. And that's dictated by the legislature, again, the length of probation. So we will sometimes ask for departure. We'll ask for probation when somebody's supposed to be a commit. Because maybe they have an addiction problem that hasn't been addressed.
Right.
Maybe they worked together with someone else to commit the crime, but they were only, aiding and abetting and had a less serious role in the crime. Those types of things call for departures, and we ask for those departures. And then a judge has to weigh whether or not they think it's appropriate. They take public safety into account, and they take whether or not probation can actually help this person to not reoffend, because that's the goal, to not reoffend. So we do make departures.
Okay.
I can't say they're granted all the time. They are sometimes, but I think if you make the appropriate argument and the facts are there, sometimes departures are appropriate.
Okay. Well, what do you see are the most significant challenges that are facing the court today, and what would you do to address them?
like any other agency or business these days, I think budget drives a lot of the challenges facing administration these days. They've had a cut in personnel and court staff. Ramsey County's been pretty lucky. We haven't had to close our fine windows like some other districts have. We've been able to keep those open, but less court staff means it takes longer to get through the court system. So you have to work with that reduced court staff, and you have to do more with less. I work at the Public Defender's Office. We are champions at doing more with less based on our lack of funding. So I think that experience will lend itself well to working with a reduced staff and reduced budgets.
Which I would agree that Public Defender's Office is, that's a very important spot for our society to defend those that don't have money, because you get ran over very easily, and you didn't know it. You know, and you're going up there and you're destroying yourself, and you can be destroying your life by admitting to things you probably didn't even do.
Exactly.
I've just seen it. I see it happen quite a bit. So, what are some of the other challenges?
Well, because of those budget cuts, you also see some specialty courts in danger of being cut. And because of budget cuts, we can't expand those specialty courts. Currently, we have a DWI court, a drug court, and a mental health court, and a community court. They deal with some of those smaller, like nuisance-type crimes, as they're called. And so we pay special attention as to why these people commit those crimes. We try to get them help so they stop committing those kind of nuisance-type crimes. We work with addiction issues. We work with treatment. And I think that's important, because if you're looking at public safety and not having people reoffend, I think if you get at the root of the problem, I think that will protect public safety in the end. It's easier to rehabilitate someone than it is to just keep locking them up.
Definitely. That's expensive.
Right. And Hennepin County recently just started a veterans court to deal with specific issues from our returning veterans. And I would love to see that happen in Ramsey County, but again, it's all driven by funding. And so again, I think those specialty courts play an important role in protecting public safety, and so I'd like to see them continue and to expand.
Well, just on this funding bit, you know, the state is saying, here's your money. I don't know how much it is for Ramsey County, your budget, but is that money coming in for Ramsey County or the 2nd Judicial District? Is that increasing each year, but there's just so much more need for other judges or other players in the system? Or is the actual dollar amount decreasing each year? Or is there a bigger demand on the courts that there's not enough money? What?
Depending on what study you read, what article you read, I've read anywhere from 10 to 12% reduction in budget. So it's not just that we're maintaining the status quo and caseloads are going up, the actual budget is going down. There's been hiring freezes on court staff, and yeah, we're working
So
with
if there's
less.
a $10 million budget, it's been reduced down to $9 million.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I'm not sure what the actual budget is.
Right, I don't.
But yeah, I've heard anywhere from 10 to 12% reduction in the last few years. So.
Okay. Just real quick, your judicial philosophy. Where are you? Kind of a strict constructionist, or original intent, or it's a Constitution's evolving kind of, or something else?
Well, our Constitution was written hundreds of years ago, a couple hundred years ago, and the Constitution is the law. It was written well enough that we don't have to keep changing it. You need stability in the law, and our Constitution provides for that. It's very difficult to change the Constitution, to add an amendment. I mean, it's a very difficult process to go through, but that's something that the citizens need to decide. Now, as times changed, we're able to use the same Constitution and kind of plug in new concepts. For instance, in search and seizure law, it was written hundreds of years ago. It applied to people's homes. Well, now people drive around in automobiles. There are computers. There are cell phones. There's all sorts of things that you can still apply that same basic principle of the right to personal privacy that the Constitution allows you to do. So I think the Constitution applies in today's society, and there's not much we need to do to change that.
Right.
So I don't know if that means I'm a strict constructionist or somebody who just believes it's more of a living document that can adapt to the times. I guess I'd say more of the latter. I think those same core principles of right to privacy and things like that are kind of the bedrock of our legal system. So a judge has to follow the law, even if you don't like it. And
Well, that's an important, it's important to know, yeah.
exactly.
And to understand.
Yeah, keep your personal opinion out. Remain fair and impartial and neutral. Apply the law as it exists, whether you like it or whether you don't.
Well, and I say that's the only way people are going to know what the law means. Because when you got one judge doing one thing and another doing another thing, and then the legislature doesn't know what to change, and the
Exactly.
people don't know what is the law and how can this be ruled this way and that way, and how do I contact my representatives to say what's going on here, what is the law?
Exactly.
And so it really confuses the issue. So yeah, I hope judges follow the law, and of course the Constitution being the groundwork for that law, and some of our statutes aren't constitutional. You know, but you as a judge, you have to, somebody's got to say, hey judge, this law is unconstitutional, otherwise you got to go with the statute, or can you yourself go with, well, the Constitution says this, the statute gets thrown out.
Well, kind of the way it works, and this is just kind of a simplistic explanation, is that, you know, if there is a statute in place, the judge has to follow that statute, because that is the law. They have to apply that law. Now, if a person wants to appeal that to the Court of Appeals or to the Supreme Court to say that that statute is unconstitutional, they can do that. But that's for the appellate courts to decide. They will tell the district court, that law is unconstitutional, you don't need to apply it. That way the legislature is put on notice. That law is not a good law anymore. You need to either change it or pass a new one. So that's kind of the way it works, that balance of powers between the different branches of government.
Okay. We're running down, we're almost out of time here. But one thing, I saw one show you were on, a question was asked about judicial temperament. And I'm just saying as my opinion here, and from what I've seen, in you running against Judge Leary, I've seen him in the courtroom. He does not have the appropriate judicial temperament. I saw him saying, okay, you're going to plead this, you're going to plead innocent, guilty, no contest. He was telling people how they're going to plead, and then he wasn't letting people explain their case when they had the right to. And other people were making charges against them. And this wasn't in arraignment or you know, this was more pretrial issues and talking things out. He wasn't letting the other side say things. And it just blew me away. So, you know, I've seen you around, and you can just tell, I know you have the right judicial temperament in this. It's just my opinion. So just one last thing, anything else you want to say here before we go?
Well, I think
the final word.
Just judicial temperament is probably what is the biggest difference between myself and my opponent. I think that's what distinguishes us. We've both been lawyers for a number of years. I think we both know the law. I'm not saying he doesn't. But it's the judicial temperament and the thought that this is a privilege to serve, it's not a right. And that
That's right, yeah.
There was an article in the Pioneer Press that I've quoted a number of times, and it was written by a reporter who's following a story about him. And I'd like to just quote from that.
Okay.
Critics have described Leary as a judge who throws his weight around and sometimes fails to treat fellow professionals with respect. I think that's an accurate statement of his judicial temperament.
I do too. I mean, I would say that. I've seen it. And I've talked to a number of other people, public defenders, non-public defenders, a lot of attorneys that would say that describes him well.
And it's not just the public defenders. This isn't the public defender's office.
It's other attorneys.
Exactly. It's not the public defender's office running against Judge Leary. It's me running against Judge Leary. Yes, he sometimes treats public defenders with a little less than the respect that they deserve, but I've heard this from private attorneys as well. I think anyone who goes into a courtroom, whether you're an attorney or a litigant, has a right to be treated with patience, respect, and courtesy, to not have to be afraid that you're going to get yelled at or that your voice isn't going to be heard. And I think that's what separates me from my opponent,
Right.
probably the biggest difference between us. So don't just settle for the status quo. Don't just vote for that incumbent.
That's right.
I always say vote for the right eye. Iverson, not incumbent.
The right eye? A good one. Good
Vote
one.
for the
I
right
like
eye.
that. All right. Thank you, Connie, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Now, we're going to play a little clip here about judges. This has nothing to do with Connie. This friend of mine put this together. And it just shows some of my views on the judiciary and what's going on there. So we'll play that now.